Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
What actually happens when we die? Do we die? Are near-death experiences real?
Greetings all, and welcome to the 89th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Paul, and opening with those very basic but very important questions today was my son, co-host, and partner in the paranormal, Ben.
Well, hey there, and we have one of our most popular guests back today. But before we introduce him, let's take care of our weekly paranormal contest. Julie Mullins of Detroit, Michigan, and the great WYCD-FM got last week's question: in what year did a UFO reportedly land in a schoolyard in Africa in front of 62 children? The alleged event occurred in Ruwa, Zimbabwe in September of 1994. This week's question is a tough one. At what famous haunted house in Illinois did a ghost hunter promise to put the spirit to rest, then dropped dead himself a few hours later? Give it a shot. Call us locally at 401-766-1240 or nationally at 800-449-1240. If nobody gets it before the end of the show, drop a line to me at ben@behindtheparanormal.com. Be the first to get it right and win a copy of Behind the Moss Curtain and other great Savannah stories by today's guest.
Back on the show today, by popular demand, Murray Silver, who was a fifth-generation son of Savannah, Georgia. His family has lived there since the 1840s, and it's because some of his own ancestors are among Savannah's most famous hauntings that he has become one of America's leading authorities on ghosts. He is the host of the PBS television series Haunted South and publishes the Bible of local haunted tour guides, Haunted Savannah. A top-rated national speaker from Mensa, Murray also was a Hollywood and Washington insider. He's the acclaimed author of the book Great Balls of Fire, the uncensored story of Jerry Lee Lewis, which was made into the movie of that name starring Dennis Quaid and Winona Ryder. Murray is the author of a number of books, including his memoirs, When Elvis Meets the Dalai Lama, and Behind the Moss Curtain, a collection of true stories about Savannah, paranormal stories about Savannah, which is, of course, our contest prize today. Murray worked in the late 60s as a promoter for rock bands like Fleetwood Mac, Grateful Dead, the Allman Brothers, and others. While going to law school, he transitioned from promoter to journalist in the 70s and 80s, touring with acts such as Pink Floyd, Paul McCartney, Bob Dylan, Elton John, and Peter Gabriel. On top of all that, Murray became a paranormal investigator and historian of great insight and depth. His website is www.murrayonspirit.com. And as we talk with Murray today, feel free to join the discussion. Quick message us. No, you can't do that in this station, can you?
Yeah.
Right. Or call us at 401-766-1240 locally or 800-449-1240 toll-free nationally.
Murray Silver, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
My brother Ben, how are you?
Good, you?
Terrific. Congratulations on your 89th broadcast.
Thank you. We're getting there. We got a little audio ghost here. Okay. Anyway, well, Murray, it's great to have you back with us. You're a good friend and a wonderful guy. And Ben, I guess, is going to start us off with our questions today, which is going to be we're covering, by the way, the cheerful subject of death.
That's
okay.
Lovely.
Murray's got some insights here, so go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, you recently had a profound near-death experience. Can you exfoliate on that point?
Well, Ben, to tell you the truth, as some of your listeners may have heard in the past, our conversations about ghosts, I've been trying to get to the bottom of what ghost is from the scientific point of view. And science demands that we conduct experiments over and over again so that we can get to the bottom of whatever it is in the scientific method. Now, one of the toughest aspects, and one of the reasons why science has always held that there are no such things as ghosts, is that science says that there's no experiment that you can conduct that ultimately proves that ghosts exist. And one of the problems that science has is that there's just no way that you can observe death. And what is interesting to me is now that the world's medical communities have finally, and only recently, begun a systematic study into what is called a near-death experience. And it just so happens that early this year, I had one in a doctor's office. I was undergoing what was supposed to be a routine medical procedure, and I lost consciousness. And in this process, I had a near-death experience, which helps me plug in a lot of the blanks. It's where usually most studies leave off. I mean, until you've gone through the process of dying, it's very, very hard to observe it while you are alive. And so consequently, having had this experience, I was able to plug in the last blank to what I think the process entails. And what I discovered was that the body more or less disintegrates in a reverse order from the way it is knit together in the womb. And what is fascinating to me is that as the sensory powers begin to fail, that you're quite aware of it. And so that is what you more or less go through when you're having what is called this near-death experience, that as the body disintegrates, the first thing that fails are the earth elements, which is the musculature, and then the earth elements dissolve into the water elements, which is, the blood and the lymph system. And then the water element fails and passes into the fire element. And as the body loses its warmth, then the wind element dissolves, which is the breathing. And at this point, we fall into an initial stage of unconsciousness. The mind perceives the darkness. All energies have ceased. And it's at this point that the mind begins to dissolve in a similar manner to the body. After the body has gone through the dissolution process, then the mind begins to dissolve, and this is where people encounter the famous white light. And as far as I can tell from my perspective, the white light that we encounter represents the end of conceptuality. And in turn, this white light dissolves into a heightened mind of a red appearance, which then dissolves into black. And it is at this point we lose all consciousness and the moment of death occurs. And when the blackness clears away, that leaves a complete state of I could best describe as emptiness. So what happens next is, it's a matter of opinion. And science says that there is no life after death simply because we can't see it from this perspective. And science has always needed the kind of evidence and proof that no one has been able to go and get and bring back. But this is where science always falls woefully short, Ben. Just because something cannot be seen doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I mean, there are many things in this world that we know to exist that can't be seen with the naked eye, and the afterlife is one of them. However, we can observe when consciousness leaves the body. There are external signs of it. And so, therefore, if we can observe consciousness leaving the body, then that means consciousness is a separate thing from body and mind, and it has to go somewhere, and that is where the subject of ghosts begins. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to link everything together and explain it in one seamless narrative in order to satisfy science.
That's very interesting. One of the things you said about the body shutting down one element at a time, it just reminded me of the story of Socrates when he was sentenced to death by the Greek authorities for corrupting youth. I guess he was teaching them deductive reasoning. He was sentenced to drink hemlock, and as you recall the story, students were around him as he died, and he very systematically reported one element of the body shutting down at a time, and he very only Socrates could do this, I guess. But it was quite sort of grimly amusing, and he eventually died. But he reported much the same thing as you did. I don't know.
Paul, let me interrupt to say though that here's the interesting thing. Now, this death process can take as long as 3 days. So it gives rise to the possibility that if you die an untimely death, if you die by accident, if you're murdered, killed in war, commit suicide, the body doesn't have the chance to go through all of these subtle changes in a natural progression. And consequently, I think this may explain the reason why so many hauntings, or so many ghosts are attendant to untimely or violent death. So that's one of the theories I'm proceeding on, that one of the causes of ghosts is the fact that the person is not allowed to die in a timely fashion in which all of these subtle energies have the chance to do what they do. After all, it takes 9 months for a human being to come together in the womb. You figure that it needs at least 3 days to come apart. So this is one of the things I'm proceeding on, and when I work with various scientists in various fields, this is the way that we are approaching the concept of what creates the phenomenon known as ghosts.
That's an interesting point of view. It certainly makes sense. But what about your own personal experience? It didn't take place over 3 days, did it?
No. It all transpired in about 20 minutes, which was what was fascinating to me. I think it's because I did not go through the entire process, that all I was granted was a glimpse of it. And so what is interesting to me, though, is that if you have this so-called near-death experience, you have this experience of moving through a black tunnel toward this brilliant, peaceful, loving light. And it's the near-death experience is not actual death because consciousness has not yet left the body permanently. So it's possible to remain in this state for as long as 3 days. And that is why I think that so many people who are undergoing surgical procedures or whatever or die in the hospital rooms or operating rooms, they're able to experience this without completing the entire process. But it's when this clear light vision ceases and consciousness leaves the body and enters into that intermediate state that we call life after death, this is where things change. This is where there's a radical shift. There's no going back at that point. And however, this intermediate state, Paul, can last for as long as a week, and it's during this time which spirit is seeking rebirth, whether it's heaven, hell, the next life, whatever. I can't answer all the questions yet. But the point is that in life, we can get a glimpse of this clear light experience. Sometimes when you go through a faint or when you lose consciousness, you can get a glimpse of this clear light experience. And you can also access it in phases of sleep and dreaming and meditation.
Yeah, we have some questions on that later. You know, what you say brings to mind the Tibetan Buddhist practice, and you're a friend of the Dalai Lama, so you know more about Tibetan Buddhism than I do. But as I recall, having studied it, do they not have someone reading instructions to someone? I guess the body is left. Is it 3 days? I believe.
That's correct.
And people are instruction, do not be afraid. What you're seeing is an illusion, and they encourage lucid dreaming, or at least to develop the idea of lucid dreaming, which means that you know that you're dreaming and can control things to a certain extent during your lifetime as a spiritual practice in preparation for the experience of what happens after death.
True. There's a book which people can purchase. It has recently been reduced to writing in it, and I think you can find it online at Snow Lion, which distributes all of the books about Tibetan Buddhism, and Shambhala Press. The Tibetan Book of Death and Dying, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is a guidebook that you read from start to finish, which includes prayers, and in which you actually sit at the bedside of the person. And as they begin to lose consciousness, you begin to read to them, because even though they're not going to be coming back, they're still able to hear. And consequently, you're reading these instructions to them and these encouragements to them, and you're actually helping them through the process, because of the Tibetan Buddhist way of thinking. What happens is that the spirit then goes through an obstacle course, and this obstacle course is like any other gauntlet that you run. There's a right way and a wrong way to do it, and if you do it in the right way, then you can control the process and the outcome, whereas if you don't, you're given up to all sorts of terrors that force you into an unfavorable rebirth. And so they feel that by reading the instructions that you help the spirit make this transition. And there are practices while you are hale and hearty and in the middle of life. There are meditative practices that you can do that prepare you for this when the event actually comes. Because in the Tibetan way of thinking, Paul, there is the most important thing you do in life is die, because that's what sets up what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
And so to their way of thinking, the most important thing that you do in your lifetime is die, and that's why they say that you should die in the proper state of mind to avoid all of these problems that can happen thereafter.
Okay. Let me just remind everybody, our local number is 766-1240, or nationally 800-449-1240 from anywhere in the USA. We always get very few calls when Murray's on, because people are so fascinated listening to him, they don't want to miss anything. Ben has our next question.
Oh, yes, that I do. All right, a couple weeks ago we had Dr. Michael Persinger on our show, and he was talking about his God helmet, and he claims that your reaction is just an electrical stimuli, and that his helmet can simulate the death experience and like spiritual experiences and all of that. What do you think of that statement?
I think anything is possible. But I think that what the doctors tapped into, and I think what is causing a certain amount of confusion, is that one of the things that greatly concerns me and the physicists that I work with right now is that there is a shift going on in the world's magnetic field. And if you think that the movie 2012 was scary, when this kicks in, forget it. Because when these shifts in the magnetic field will completely change the way this world operates, including the way machinery and equipment operate, and just about everything you can think of will be affected by the shift in the magnetic field. It's also, I think, where it's showing up first is there people who have psychic ability are saying that it's now easier than any time before to access other timelines and dimensions because there is this shift in the magnetic field which is bringing it about.
That's true.
The difference between time and space, the divisions, these veils, if you will, and some of my associates who have actually traveled between as many as 16 dimensions have reported to me that they believe it is becoming easier to do so, and that more and more people will be able to do it easier simply because of this shift in the magnetic field. So I think that anything is possible. And what has always surprised me is that science is always very, very quick to tell you that things aren't. But the point that I'm making is I think that the doctor is trying to approach the same thing I am, but from a different perspective and a different point of view. Ultimately, we all hope to arrive at the truth. But the thing that concerns me right now, what I think the doctor should be spending more time looking at, is this present shift in the magnetic field, which, if it continues in the direction that it's going, will completely change life on this planet with a far greater degree than global warming or anything else.
Yeah. No, I'm hearing that everywhere. But as far as Dr. Persinger, actually, we were prepared to blow him out of the water. But, I mean, actually, he was, Ben blows PhDs out of the water all the time on this.
Yep.
But he was actually quite reasonable. His approach was, very open-minded, and we had a wonderful conversation with him. He's a great guy. I have my skepticism is pretty much universal. It includes science, actually. So I was going to ask him, I said, just because you can or claim you can stimulate these experiences with this God helmet and various electrodes, does that mean they're not real? And I think absolutely, it has nothing to do with their reality and objective reality. And I mean, I've told you about some of my experiences in psychiatric hospitals, working with people who were allegedly mentally ill. And were they really having chemical imbalances in the brain to create these illusions of other worlds, or were they dealing with real worlds?
Right.
Because there's plenty of examples talk about near-death experiences, standing with hospital staff next to older people who were dying, and not only were they talking about what they were seeing, but things on shelves were flying off or falling off, and the room at one point, even in one instance at Ogdensburg State Hospital in New York State, the room started to shake.
Wow.
And that's, so I mean, there's a lot going on here, and you're certainly doing a good job of explaining it tonight. I have a little, we don't agree on everything. We're great friends. We're practically brothers, but, we don't agree on everything. One of the things is death, and I think that the body doesn't die in the multiverse perspective, because it can. I mean, it's everywhere in all these different worlds. Not everywhere, but a lot of different places. So, but again, it does come down to saying the same thing in different terms.
Right.
Okay, here's another question I had for you, Murray. How does your personal near-death experience compare with others you've heard about?
Well, here's what I think I tapped into. All of us, Paul, have experienced the process of living and dying many times.
Many times,
and all of us have experienced the famous clear light of being. And those of us who know how can achieve a liberation from this endless cycle of rebirth by remaining in that clear light of being. Now, what happens to so many people, Paul, when they encounter it, is that it scares the hell out of them, because they look at that as the terminus in game. When you encounter the clear light, which is basically emptiness, it is. Some people refer to it as bliss. Some people think of this as the ultimate realization, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, and it's known by many names. Most spirit is scared to death of it and turns around, heads back in the other direction, and goes right back into life. Why? Because this is where it's at. This is what is addictive. The human experience is it. I mean, and it's a very addictive thing. And at the end of this life, people come to regret the fact that there's not more of it. And so consequently, when spirit encounters this clear light and realizes you can either go into it and remain there forever, or you can turn around and go back and play the game again, set up the Monopoly board, and start all over, most spirit makes that decision, which is the reason why we have this endless cycle of rebirth. Now, I think that was the difference between the experience that I had and what so many other people have. Mm-hmm. Some people say they see the white light and they're told, oh, it's not your time, you got to go back. But the point is, you have a very clear choice here. And those who understand this can free themselves, can achieve this ultimate liberation of this endless cycle of rebirth by remaining in the clear light. And that, again, is what religious practice, while you're alive, that it can prepare you for this. Now, the doctor was talking about simulating an experience. And to me, Paul, the difference between simulating the experience and having one is that, yeah, it's possible to get a glimpse of the clear light. But until you've actually entered and encountered it, there's no it's the same thing as if you get into a flight simulator. It's all the difference between getting into a million. I've sat in one, $1 million flight simulator of a jet plane, and getting into a jet plane.
Yeah, very good.
And your reactions and everything, your thought processes are totally different. Now, here's something fascinating that the monks once mentioned to me. When I asked them, I said, well, this clear light of being that everybody talks about and so forth, which is achieved readily in the meditation state, how did the rest of us laymen get a glimpse of that? And they actually said, well, you know what's funny is that during the act of sex, at the moment of orgasm, the mind enters into the best example of clear light experience that you're ever going to have. That during that actual moment of orgasm, it's almost impossible to think of anything. The mind actually experiences this clear light of being.
Yeah, it's as close as most people get to mystical experience.
So addictive. And so consequently, the monks say that is the reason why they have no need for sexual release, because in the meditative state, they're able to achieve this bliss, which is enough to make anybody want to become a monk, I suppose. But the point that I'm making to you is it's possible to simulate things, Paul. It's possible to get a glimpse of things, but until you encounter the real thing on its own terms, there's no simulation that's going to be an accurate example of it.
Yeah, well put. Well, we have to take a commercial break now. We're late because I'm so fascinated listening to Murray. But we'll be right back on Behind the Paranormal. Stay with us.
Signworks, your local sign experts, can help you answer yes to that question. Whether you're in need of a sign for your new business, a new look for your existing sign, or repair on your electrical sign, they're equipped with the newest sign-making technology and have the expertise to get your business the recognition it needs. Conveniently located at 345 Providence Street in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, American Beauty Signworks strives to help you succeed in properly marketing your business. We offer a large variety of services, including business cards, letterhead, logo design, automobile wraps, awnings, banners, digital graphics, marquees, magnetic, neon, political, and real estate signs, storefronts, vehicle lettering and graphics, vinyl signs, and website design. To find out about the most cost-effective way to market your business, call us at 401-767-2922. Visit us on the web at absignworks.com or come to the shop and meet with Chad or Kurt and get the most from your marketing dollars.
Hello and welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on ON 1240 AM and on onworldwide.com. We're visiting today with Murray Silver, all-around Renaissance man and the paranormal and just about everything else, and we're talking about the cheerful subject of death, near-death experiences, and the death experience itself. Murray, we got a couple of emails here that came in before the show, and thought we'd... our listeners tend to be thinkers, so these are some pretty good questions, I thought. This is from S. Bianchi in Montreal, Canada, and Ben, take it away.
Right. Was Murray's NDE what he expected? Near-death experience. Mine was not. I have been a devout Christian all of my life and expected to meet Jesus. I did not meet a bright glowing figure, but was very surprised to see that this figure had my face. What does that mean?
Well, I'm not so sure that that is a fundamental part of what is normally called the near-death experience. It's encountering yourself as if you're looking in a mirror. But I'll say this: the state between existences which is commonly referred to the afterlife. Different religions hold different views on the afterlife, like everything else. But in the end, we find there's an underlying truth evident in all views that there is a space between death and rebirth. And while not all religions believe it is possible to be reborn in another human existence, all acknowledge that spirit is reborn in one form or another, either here or in heaven or hell or wherever they may be. What is interesting, however, is that from the Tibetan Buddhist point of view, and these people, I think, have probably studied life after death more thoroughly than any other religion. What is interesting is that in this process of transformation, from transition from this life to the next, for the first couple of days, the spirit is more strongly attracted to the past life than the future life. But during this transition, the spirit begins to resemble the person or entity that it is going to become. And so I think that actually it is possible where you are looking at yourself, as it were, and you're either seeing the person you used to be or the person you're going to become. And so I think that all of this being an experience of mind, I think that whatever this listener has experienced was in fact a real experience and a view of the afterlife that I have heard about before. So there's nothing. This is not something that I experienced, but it's something that I believe is actually possible. And but I will say this: the near-death experience isn't anything that it's not cinematic. It's a very natural process, and it's like all other natural processes that when you're seeing and experiencing, you're going, oh, well, it's kind of unremarkable. And because it's a natural progression, it's like going to sleep. It's like falling asleep and waking up. It happens slowly, gradually, and you're aware of it. You can't really prevent it. You can't stop it. But the point that I'm making to you is that you're aware of it. And at a certain point, there's a disconnect in which something kicks in that you're no longer in control of, and that's what scares people, is that lack of control, which you exert during every waking moment of your life. You think you're in control, only to find out that you're not really. So all of these things fascinate me, and I think that everybody goes through this process. Ultimately, regardless of what it may look like to you, I think there's an underlying truth to the basic experience.
Okay. It's funny, we've been talking about this subject of the light. Has come up a number of times in our conversation. And I don't know if you remember when we were at the Mensa convention in 2007 together. This is the last time we actually met you physically. I made a presentation, and there was a photograph that I referred to as possibly being a photograph of the light. And what it was, in my interpretation, was there were two rooms superimposed over another. Maybe you remember that. And there was this brilliant light. And this comes out in a lot of photos, and sometimes we even see it, or at least I've seen it. My own eyes. I don't know about you, Ben.
No.
That particular
maybe. I don't remember.
case or others. Anyway, it struck me that this could be the light that everyone's talking about. You know, the plasma vortex between worlds, of which there seem to be many, and that in my interpretation seems to be the light. So that's what I think of when you mention the light as possibly that electromagnetic energy that holds everything together, and you know the boundaries between worlds. Here's one from Matt Bork in Spokane, Washington.
And Matt writes to us, do the kinds of dreams we have give any indication of the kinds of death experiences we are going to have?
Well, that's a good point, Matt. Thank you for your question. There is also, not to belabor the point, but the Tibetan Buddhists also have this wonderful body of thought and research on dreams and their meaning. Now, of course, you know, every psychologist and every psychiatrist at some point studies dreams and what they mean. And there is a whole language when it comes to dreams and what images mean and what they don't mean. Typically, and I think a lot of psychologists agree, that typically what you dream is not an actual representation, but it's usually the obverse. For example, among Tibetans, they say that it's actually if you dream of red flowers, it means that death is impending. Now, most people think that to dream of red flowers would be a pleasant thing. So when you're talking about the dream litany and you talk about the dream world, usually the things we dream are not actual representations of what is going to come. There is something, however, that is interesting to me, is that in talking to the doctors and nurses who attend the dying, it's interesting to note the experiences of patients who have had a hallucination of going to a good place or a bad place. Obviously, their future is materializing in front of them, the place where they're headed. And while we may call this a hallucination, to the patient, it's very, very real. Many of the doctors and nurses that I've spoken to that attend the dying say that at some point, right before death, the patient will speak to someone that no one else can see or hear. And
yeah, I've seen that.
Typically, this is a spouse, or in many cases, they say it's mama that comes and gets us if mama is predeceased. None of these doctors and nurses have ever reported somebody seeing Jesus. It's usually a near relative that comes and gets us on the day that we die. And there's usually 2 or 3 other entities there that may not be known to the patient who come along. So apparently, in many cases, there are 3 entities that come and get us. One of them is somebody we recognize, somebody that we recognize that is dead, that has passed before us. So I think, though, getting back to Matt's question, I think that the things that we encounter in dreams, there are dreams, but then there are visitations. And oftentimes, spirit, when it has a message for us, reaches us in the deeper states of sleep, because during the waking moment, we are so bombarded with all of these other impulses that it's very hard to hear spirit. And unless you have a heightened psychic ability, it's only during sleep that you're able to access these other dimensions, and it's easier to contact your guide. And this is where they download things to you. Now, if Matt wants to improve his ability to tap into the dream world and improve his ability to tap into spirit, my suggestion to Matt is to do the very same thing that people in religious training of all kinds, whether they're Catholic priests or Buddhist monks, do, and that is they begin their day usually at 4 o'clock in the morning with meditation and prayer, because it is at this hour, this is the sacred hour of the day when the day actually begins, and when the window between this world and the next is wide open, and it is much easier to tap into spirit. So if Matt wants to improve his understanding of what's going on during the dream state, then Matt should learn to work with the natural energies and to meditate and to pray. And if he does this in the early morning hours, he will be amazed at what is revealed to him. At least that's my quick fix.
Yeah, I agree. There's one thing in this mix that has always kind of bothered me. And one is that, first, it starts with the idea that when, very often you'll talk to the garden variety medium or psychic or, whatever, and they'll say, well, it all comes across rather warm and fuzzy. I have a problem with the idea that child molesters and people who are evil and are perfectly aware of the fact that they're evil would have some kind of warm, fuzzy experience at death. What's your reaction to that? I think there is justice somehow.
I did too, and I tell you, many of these doctors and nurses say that there are people who, quite frankly, are terrified because they have often seen this black, they describe him as the man in black, standing in front of a field of flames. There are people also, what some nurses, older nurses will describe to me as the patient wrestles with angels, meaning that while they're in a comatose state, they will start to thrash the bed, and they will start to thrash about as if they're fighting off. They call this wrestling with angels. These are people who don't want to go. The time has come, and even in this state, in a comatose state, they're still trying to fight off what is going to happen next. So, doctors may say, well, these are hallucinations brought on by drugs or whatever, so forth. Well, it may be a hallucination to the doctor, but to the patient in that bed, it's a very real thing. Now, I can tell you this. I can tell you this straight up. This is something. I had a dear friend named Kenny who died 2 years ago, and I went to his bedside at his request because he wanted to give me a message to deliver to his family at the funeral, in which he asked me to perform the eulogy, and there were certain things he wanted me to say to his family. And as I watched Kenny begin to slip away, and Kenny looked up into a corner of this hospital room, and he saw somebody that he did not want to get to know better. And what was disturbing to me is that when Kenny passed, horribly contorted as a mask, and this steam-like appearance came hissing out of his mouth, which his brothers and sisters around him took as a very, very bad sign. So, yes, there are some of us who go into the death process, and the white light is not what they see first, and quite frankly, what they see scares the hell out of them. So I think you're right, Paul. I think there's certain people, I think there are evil people who are going to go to a place that I would not care to visit, and I think that is all valid and true.
Let me balance that with one memory I have from being a grad student when I was studying for the priesthood at Ogdensburg State Hospital. Again, it was a very old man who was in the hospital because he was, there were a lot more inpatients in those days than there are today, and he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he was paralyzed as well, very old, and he could not move. I'd never seen him. He could only move his head. He could talk, but he couldn't move the rest of his body. He was bedridden. And he was at the point of death, and there were several people around. He had no family. There were just a couple of nurses and a doctor and myself and a priest. And he, all of a sudden, there was a beautiful feeling in the room. He all of a sudden sat up, something he couldn't do, looked into the corner of the room. Somehow it's always the corner.
Right.
And he said, Abba, Ba. And he fell back down, and that was it. And I didn't know Hebrew then, but when I did learn, I said, Abba, Ba means Daddy comes.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. You know Hebrew.
Right.
Yeah, and it's probably the most intimate, beautiful, personal thing you can say, I guess, about your father. Abba, and it was, and he was, the guy was Irish. I mean, can't imagine that he knew Hebrew, and given no indication before. But it was absolutely glorious experience just to be there.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, what are you working on these days besides your radio program? What are you doing?
Okay, well, we're doing a lot of radio. We're in demand. We got we're doing 2 hours of shows now, and with CBS is doing reruns for us on Saturday nights, prime time, and then we got our poor little South Dakota station, who we love dearly, is after us to keep up our 2-hour special. So stay tuned. We may turn that into a panel show, and you may be number one on the runway. So stay tuned for that. And then I'm trying to finish my next book, Turning Home. I already finished that one. The Dancing Past the Graveyard: What Ghosts Have to Say About God. And I just,
cool.
And we're trying to. Well, it's going to be a while before I finish it. I don't know.
Supposed to finish 2 years ago.
I should have been. Well, you're a big help, but you don't write it. But you give me some good ideas. Ben is my inspiration.
I'm there for spiritual support.
Yeah, and then we're doing cases, but we find ourselves sticking with cases for very long periods of time because the more you look at, the more you find. You yourself know what happens when you get the government involved. And we had some problems with some things that one particular show we did. And I've been joking with Murray. Let's get him back on our CBS show. Imagine the heck we can raise with that. But in any case, we'll talk about that off the air. But there's another email here. This is from. Ben is reminding me we have a break. I'm sorry, we got another commercial break. Be right back with Marie Silver on Behind the Paranormal.
New River Press is proud to sponsor tonight's segment of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Benjamin Eno. New River Press offers the best in unusual New Age books. Stand by the side of tonight's host, Paul Eno, as he battles poltergeists and helps suffering souls and families in the critically acclaimed books Faces at the Window and Footsteps in the Attic. Plunge deeper into the paranormal with Paul and learn about its influence on human history, its action in our daily lives, and its ultimate meaning for us in the best-selling Turning Home, God, Ghosts, and Human Destiny. Available now from New River Press, publishers of unusual books. Visit newriverpress.com, amazon.com, or your favorite bookstore. And set for release late this year in one of the most unusual books on the subject ever written, Paul gives us Dancing Past the Graveyard: What Ghosts Have to Say About God.
Okay, we're back Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno and on ONWorldwide.com and WON 1240 AM. And our guest today, the great Murray Silver, our good friend, all-around Renaissance man, paranormal expert, and expert in so many things. Murray, we have an email here from Cara M. in New York City, who appears to be I guess we might say, a philosophical disciple of mine, and has a question accordingly.
All right. What do near-death experiences mean for Paul's idea that when you die, we just move from one parallel life to another along a path of least resistance?
Well, as I said, oftentimes what happens to spirit in this in-between state, it's an obstacle course. And quite frankly, people are so frightened by what they encounter that you take the first available exit, which is typically an unfavorable rebirth. But in concluding the answer to the question, what happens when we die, it's important to note that the future is in your hands as far as your karma will get you. And regardless of where you go from here, there will be a death at the end of that experience too, and we start all over again unless you learn to break the cycle of existence. All of it involves a type of suffering, and that is what we seek to free ourselves of, and that is actually the purpose of religion. All religions are simply an attempt to help man evolve towards perfection, and each religion holds a portion of the truth. But basically, all religions serve two purposes. Number one is to help man deal with suffering, and the second is to counsel his fear of death. So where religions teach a worship of the angelic types, Christ, Muhammad, Buddha, we are all in the same process of attainment as we shift from ego to spirit. And it therefore becomes the duty of each of us to follow the same path of self-emancipation and become your own savior. Because it's my contention, I'm sure it's Paul's as well, that no being can be saved through another's action, that the immortal ethical life must be lived in order to advance in the hierarchy of being. So as far as I can tell, what all of this illustrates, Kara, is that the purpose of the universe is for spirit to manifest itself in a conscious form. And at the level of spirit, we are all one and the same. Therefore, the person who leads a spiritual life has learned to treat all sentient beings as equal. And observed from the highest point of view, we are all involved in an inextricably interconnected single life that is moving toward the absolute. And we have only now reached the stage in our development where mankind has realized that consciousness is permeable and that our psychic gifts are being reawakened. So this is how it works. The imagination that we're gifted is the actualization of divine will. And our thought processes are the actualization of divine mind. And our feelings, that's the actualization of divine nature. And all of this is what leads to paradise. That's what I think we're all involved in, and I think we're all interconnected. And I think the whole point is we're supposed to be helping each other along the path, and certainly Ben and Paul served that objective by conducting this radio program and sharing what they've experienced and allowing other people like me to share what they know, and hopefully that the light of the truth shines through and that you find this useful, Kara.
Excuse me. Yes, that's true. We certainly agree. There is something that came up earlier in the show that I wanted to touch on again, and it's rather bigger than because all of this is bigger than all of us, but the whole notion of 2012 and this electromagnetic pulse or whatever is happening, astronomers will tell you, if you ask them, sometimes prod them, that something weird is happening electromagnetically across the galaxy, and that this probably will affect us in many ways. Among them, as you say, perhaps the thinning of the walls, if you will, or the membranes between dimensions.
Right.
We're seeing this. Now, we unfortunately work with a lot of people who have negative experiences in the paranormal. What people might in folklore call demons, or we call parasites, whatever you want to call them. They're you don't want them around. They're hungry and they're hostile, and they seem to be having very easy access to a lot more people than they used to, at least in our experience. Also, there are good things happening. As you say, people who are psychically gifted seem to be having less trouble accessing information or looking into the different worlds, however you want to put it. I don't know. Let me see how you react to this. In my view, we're going to see more and more of this leading up to 2012 or 2016, whenever or this thing is going to peak. I think what's going to happen is that more and more people are going to be having paranormal experiences, sometimes good, sometimes bad. I think people are going to become very frightened. I think governments are going to become very frightened. And I think that they're not going to go run into kids who have EMF meters running around in abandoned hospitals. I don't know. Somebody's got who's going to lead us through this?
Paul, that is a fascinating question because I got news for you. One of the biggest problems is that the government are making people like me sound as if we're nutcases. They're trying to discredit the people who are trying to push the edge of the envelope further, and instead of getting their cooperation, because the government's main function is to try to maintain peace and order, and they want to be the ultimate resolution to everything. They want to be able to continue to exert control, and anything they don't control, they're afraid of. And so the problem is that guys like me and you, who are coloring outside the line, who's supposed to bring us in line? So the best way to do it is to make us feel like we're crazy, because nobody will listen to or pay attention to crazy people. But what is phenomenal to me is if you want to see an exercise in insanity, go see the movie 2012. 2012 is this purely ridiculous, and this is a major blockbuster where people by the millions are lining up to pay their money to go and see this crap. And it makes me wonder, well, why can't you put together an honest-to-God, realistic view of what this truly is and explain the Mayan calendar and their concept of time and space and knowledge? Why can't you put that out there? If the same audience is hungry for this crap, why is it that they don't want the truth?
Yeah.
That's my bigger question. Why don't you want access to the truth?
Yeah, true.
And so what we have right now, Paul, is a period of confusion, because what we are actually in is the last stage of a great cycle. It's not the last of the cycle. I mean, I could explain the Mayan calendar if your listeners would like, but the point is 2012 is not the end of anything other than a great cycle. And the Mayans had cycles, a long count calendar that was 394 years, not 365 days. And we're simply coming to the end of one of those great cycles. But I got news for you. There's 6 more of them that we've got to go through. And so the point is that what you're going to experience over the next 2 years is there's going to be a tremendous amount of confusion. There's going to be the dying off of the old order. That World War II generation is going to disappear in order to make way for a lot of new energy that's coming into this world. And so if you can get through the next 2 years, and believe me, Paul, it's going to be tough. Mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, economically, politically, the next 2 years are going to be extremely difficult. They're going to be radical shifts. And if you can survive it, there on the other end, it's going to be a beautiful period that will remind some of us older cats of San Francisco in the 1960s. There's going to be peace and love, and it's going to be a beautiful thing. But the next 2 years are going to be a bitch. And it's because of this confusion that abounds. And if you're going to Hollywood to get the answers, then you're only going to be more confused.
Oh, my gosh, yes. That's
Because
always been the
Let me
case.
put it this way. If John Cusack and Amanda Peet are the future of the planet, we're all in trouble.
Yeah. Well, I guess that just tell us what you think, Murray. That's what other films are around the. I mean, this isn't on our script, but I was going to ask you about some other films that might be around that might be maybe not so misleading as 2012, or something that might be good, or are most of the films right now that have anything to do with the paranormal kind of off the mark?
Well, I tell you. To bring it closer to home, I don't know, maybe your viewers, I don't know if they watch these television shows about spirits that are on the Travel Channel.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
I recently participated in the show called Ghost Adventures on the Travel Channel with Zach Baggins.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
And Zach is that muscle-bound guy from Vegas who does the lockdowns in haunted places overnight, and he provokes spirits.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of this season, he came to Savannah, and he wanted to feature a place called the Moon River Brewery, which is a 200-year-old building, and the upper floors have never, ever been restored. They're in their original condition and sitting vacant. And Zach wanted to come here to do his famous lockdown. And so, having heard of my work, he invited me to come over and give him the backstory. And it's an hour-long show that he does, and for the first 30 minutes, I am his host, so to speak. And I now know the reason why Zach doesn't want people like me to be with him when he does the lockdown, because a lot of the things he does is stagey. I don't think that Zach himself really believes that he's accessing anything. I think that, however, every something comes along that gives him a wake-up call, but I think that he still approaches this from the point of view of being a skeptic. So a lot of these TV shows, one of the biggest problems that they have is that it's very unsatisfying to the audience because ultimately you never get to see anything. And they have these EVPs, or you might see a flash of this or a flash of that or a shadow, but ultimately you can watch these shows endlessly, and they never really seem to ultimately resolve the issue. Is this a ghost? If so, can you see it? And what's really perplexing is that you've got these people who will bring you to a site, and they'll tell you all these stories of what's happened there, and yet the investigators never see very much of it. So the problem is that these TV shows purport to be an accurate example of what's going on, and it's supposed to be giving you a glimpse of what it's really like, and they very, very rarely deliver. And so one of the problems that I've had is I've tried to create programs for the Travel Channel, the History Channel, for PBS, and at times, Paul, and this is what's really frustrating, at times when we've really caught compelling evidence on film, these networks won't broadcast it.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
They won't broadcast it because they say, well, this is not for our, we don't want to show. We're afraid of the response we're going to get, and we're afraid of sponsors. They don't want you ultimately to put the kinds of things on television that would cause people to sit up and take notice. They don't think that the world is ready for it. They don't mind playing with the subject,
yeah,
and they don't mind hearing things go bump in the night, but there's at a certain point, the censors kick and say, no, you know what, that is too much, or if you can't explain what that is, we don't want you putting it on there and calling it something else. And so what's frustrating to me is that the shows I've produced, some of them have not been aired because of content. And so on the one hand, the viewing public complains that they're not getting the meat, and when people like me try to provide it, the networks won't broadcast it.
Amazing.
So until we can get to the point to where you can actually sit down and have a more honest discourse, you're going to be left to go to the movies to see things like 2012.
Well, you know, it's interesting because we had Shane Searway on a couple of weeks ago, Ben, right?
Yes.
And he was talking about how he's one of the few quote-unquote ghost hunters of the modern era whom we would work with, and you too, of course. But Shane was saying that who was it? Well, we didn't mention the name of the show on the air, but one of the big ghost hunting shows contacted him and came up to and said, well, we were thinking of replacing our team, or at least some of it, and would you like to be considered? And the guy, well, said sure. And they came up and they watched an investigation by Shane and his group. What they did was take notes. According to what happened, they literally stole case notes out of their notebook, and there it was on the air, in the next season. Right, word for word, the investigation, the way that they addressed the person in the house and the counseling they did. And so this is what's apparently going on. There's no honesty. They used to at least pay you for stuff like that, but not anymore.
Well, Paul, all of the ghost shows at some point have come to Savannah. And what really stunned me is when the boys from TAPS came down here, and they were running around in pursuit of stories that were fiction. And when I told them, I said, listen, guys, these things never really happened. These are just fables. And they said to me, no, man, you don't understand. We're not really trying to prove this stuff. We don't really think that this stuff exists. We're here to debunk it. And I said, well, you come to the wrong town.
Unbelievable.
But the thing that is frustrating to me, as I said, is that I've got a body of evidence that is quite. I mean, it's satisfied the Mensa audiences around this country, but networks still have this very, very hesitant, knee-jerk reaction that what I'm dealing in may be dangerous in ways they don't even understand, and at a certain point they don't want to be a part of it. And it's frustrating to me because I don't see how I'm supposed to make any progress here if I can't share what little I know.
Well, these things, and it's tragic because, well, my view of the paranormal. I mean, it's the key to the next step in our evolution. Understanding it, it means understanding ourselves. And these people, they give it short shrift. They treat it like they're going bird watching, and it's not taken seriously. Its depth is completely ignored, and I'm frustrated as heck about it. So
well, that's ultimately. Here's the thing, Paul. You asked me about the conflict of the next 2 years. It is not a secret that if you read any news source, that the membership in churches is in steep decline. That people are moving away from organized religion because organized religion fails to answer certain questions that are on the table, including this issue of life and death and what happens and so forth. And there's a certain point that religion just doesn't want to follow. And so religion is no longer serving man. And so where are people supposed to go to further their understanding and knowledge? Where are they supposed to go? Where are they supposed to get this information? If religion doesn't do it, where are you supposed to go? And if it wasn't for a show like yours, and I'm confident in the days to come that shows like yours are going to become more and more popular. They'll never be mainstream, but your underground audience is going to be very much, Paul. Now listen to me now. Your audience, Paul, is going to be very much like what used to be called underground music. Now follow me. Back in the 1960s, all there was on the radio was AM radio, and it was top 40. It was pop songs. It was sweet and light, 2 minutes long, pop songs. There were no FM stations. And the music that was being produced by all of the great English rock bands in the late 60s, like Pink Floyd and so forth, this was called underground music. Why? Because you couldn't hear it on the air, Paul. And FM radio came along to give access to what was called underground music. I know because I used to promote these concerts back in the 60s. This was underground music, Paul. So right now, you and Ben are part of the underground. That underground, the ranks are going to swell. It's going to become mainstream. And at that point, nobody's going to be able to stop you. That's what's going to happen. It's going to take you all of 2 years, Paul, but one of these days, you're going to be bigger than Glenn Beck.
Well, that's encouraging. We make his money. But, Murray, it's always a great pleasure and a great honor to have you with us. Murray will be back on our Sunday show, March 14th on CBS Radio. And always keep an eye on his website, murrayonspirit.com. Is it back up and running?
No, it's not. I'm going to have to find another way to get back online, Paul.
Okay.
But, there are people out there who simply don't want me to do what I do.
I hear you. Yeah, well, I know from our end, I know what you mean. People get nervous, especially in Washington. Okay, well, let us know, and we'll put it up at BehindTheParanormal.com, our show website, and make sure that there are links there. Murray, thanks a million, and we'll be in touch.
All right, my brother.
Okay, all right. Okay, everybody, Murray Silver. Okay, a couple of announcements. Check out the new International Metaphysical University at intermetu.com. Accreditation is coming. I'm teaching 2 undergrad courses. My course up and running right now, Science, Religion, and the Paranormal. And coming soon, the Paranormal and Mental Illness. Okay, we're running out of time here, so many thanks to our producer, Brittany. We'll see you right here next Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern. That's 4 Pacific, and onworldwide.com, 12:40 a.m. We'll have Donna and Dudley Vole to talk about the old idea of the higher self and the new idea of parallel worlds. Check us out on CBS tomorrow night, BehindTheParanormal.com. Tell you how to get us.
See you next week.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.